Hello and welcome to the Free Outside Show. We have an awesome show and an awesome guest and an awesome interview. Go me today. So first off, let's get into some news. Things have been crazy down in Arizona. So I think 5 days ago, we had Nick Fowler. He broke the overall record on the Arizona Trail. He did it via self-supported manner, which means he resupplied himself. He did everything himself, no crew, and he broke the current supported time. So he set the fastest time going what is not considered to be the fastest way. So it's a story of determination and efficiency, and knowing Nick pretty well, we're trying to get him on the show here, so you can shoot him a DM and tell him to come on and we'll ask him all about that. What's funny about Nick is he started the record and then had some pretty bad dehydration issues in the Grand Canyon, and he was just like, well, I'll just recover for a couple days and start this thing over, and so that's what he did. Second thing, Georgia Porter just last night set or I guess a couple nights ago if you're listening, just set the supported FKT. So that is also commendable and amazing. It is a very hard trail. I think we had 5 failures this year, maybe more, people going for records. And then we have Sunny Strower out there attempting the unsupported record headed southbound. So she has a very cool style. She put wheels on a Hyperlight pack, and that's how I think she's getting it across some of these early sections when her gear is so heavy. Another announcement, I've reopened a Patreon, so there's still lots of good info from the past when I had one going. And so I'm going to be pretty transparent on there, and as things open up and we get some discount codes and partnerships and stuff flooding in, that will be the first place to get all that. You can support the show for as little as $5 a month. I really had to start this because I need to start getting better audio and video, as getting better guests and things, and I'd just like to up my game a little bit. And I also pay for a few services just out of pocket to keep this baby going, and 54 episodes in felt like the right time to start the Patreon. So if you want to support for $5 a month, it's patreon.com/freeoutside. There's also a link below. As always, 5-star reviews, ratings, rate it well, follow, subscribe, 5 stars on any platform you listen to. That helps a ton. Sharing it on social media or anywhere like that is really helpful too. There is an Instagram that I just started called Free Outside Podcast. So if you want to follow that really helps. Now today's guest, he basically inspired me to become a trail runner. Well, I actually was a trail runner, and then I read about Dean Karnazes going on these runs and even like ordering pizza within a run. It just really made it more relatable and humanized this act of running so far. It's not these mythical figures like Anton who just only run uphill, never carry water, don't eat anything, and run 170-mile weeks. That's not mainstream trail runners. And Dean Karnazes' book Ultramarathon Man really showed me that, and I think opened up the world of trail running to me. So beyond that, he's run 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. He's done, I think he says in the episode, 10 200-mile efforts out there. What else? He's won multiple ESPYs, so that's the award from ESPN. He's been voted like top 100 most influential people. He's been on all the late night talk shows. In fact, we open up with a story from Jimmy Kimmel. But Dean is very interesting because he just was so well at sharing, or so good at sharing his story and showing people, bringing them in on his adventures, and then getting brands to help make them possible. So let's dive into the episode. It's a fun one. This is Dean Karnazes. Today we are joined by Dean Karnazes, who has basically done everything in running, from running 50 marathons in 50 days, winning an ESPYs, running from Disneyland to New York. Most every prominent ultramarathon race he's competed in and completed, from Badwater to Western states. But one of my favorite little clips that's on a corner of the internet is this one time when you were on the Jimmy Kimmel show and about to take on your cross-country run. Do you remember what happened on that clip?
I'm dead, so I guess I shouldn't be speaking, but yeah, I remember. It was funny. It was hilarious. Yeah, I got run over by a bus. Yeah.
Yeah. Who came up with that idea? It was like Dean's about to start this 3,000-mile run, and then you get up the couch and run out, and then it just ends suddenly with this bus coming by, and everyone just sits there with their jaw on the floor. It was one of the funnier little moments out there.
Yeah, it was his idea, actually.
Yeah, and then they said run off the stage and then credits.
Yeah, they said they said you're starting the run now, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I'm running from your studio in LA to New York. And he's like, well, why don't you head out? And I basically ran out of the studio. They filmed me running out of the studio, and then I went to cross the street, like the first street to cross on the journey, and I got run over by a bus.
Well, I think that plays into how you've inspired so many people. I'm sure it's in the millions to start either trail running or ultra running in some way, of this ability to both humanize an endeavor like running across the country, but also kind of engage and make something fun and entertaining, whereas I think a lot of running, and probably your competitors too over the years, take it so seriously. Has that been a way to connect more with people, do you think?
Absolutely. I think that, I always try to view running as a form of play and to have fun with it, play like a child with my running. So I love competing. You name some of the races I've done, but I also love just going out and, doing fun and crazy things like running 50 marathons in all the 50 states in 50 days, or just, heading out on a 2-day run just by myself, self-supported, and just seeing what happens.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, from running like a marathon at the South Pole and running across all 4 of the major deserts and stuff, you've done crazy stuff. Were there any ideas or things that you had that you just could not pull off?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. You mentioned a race called the Badwater Ultramarathon. And if you know that race, it starts at the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, which is Badwater in the middle of Death Valley. And then it finishes at the highest point in the contiguous U.S., which is Mount Whitney. So the idea is to run from the lowest point to the highest point, and there's about 135 miles between the two. I thought, I wonder if you could run from the lowest point on Earth, not just the Western Hemisphere, to the highest point on Earth. So, everyone knows the highest point on Earth. It's Mount Everest. The lowest point on Earth is the Dead Sea in Jordan. Mm-hmm. So I've been scheming and conniving and trying for many years to put together a run from the Dead Sea to the summit of Mount Everest. It's never been done before.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating, because the brand Sea to Summit actually was founded from going from sea level to the summit. So you would take it sub-sea level.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Is that something you're still trying to pull off or get done, or is it not possible?
No, it's still in the works. I mean, there's a lot of logistics involved. There's a lot of, the geopolitical situation is in flux. So, whether like the most direct route goes through Iraq and Iran, mm-hmm. and there's just no way, you can get clearance from the State Department to do that. So then you have to take a more northern route, which is through the stands, like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. That adds a lot of distance and a lot of logistical hurdles. The other thing is that, there's a fairly short window of time you need to arrive at base camp at Mount Everest, because you can't just climb Mount Everest 365 days a year. There's only certain windows that you can do this.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what's so interesting too, especially in America, as we witness our version of the growth of trail running, but it's so different worldwide, especially I was doing some research and saw you've done a number of stage races, but in America, that type of running seems less interesting. Do you think there's a reason why this multi-day style, and especially the stage race style, is less intriguing in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know. I think that, a lot of the U.S. runners come from a very competitive standpoint. So, they're looking at, running competitive races and trying to, end up on the podium or whatever, the top 10, where these stage races are completely it's more unscripted. You can't just be a pure runner, especially when you do races like the Four Deserts or, MDS, Marathon des Sables, where you're self-supported. So it brings in a lot of other elements besides just running. And I think a lot of the runners in the US just want to run. And it's a lot easier to sign up for, a trail, just a regular trail race and do that versus, trying to learn how to run with a heavy pack, trying to learn how to go for multiple days, without much sleep, and to recover really quickly. So that's my best guess at it. But I think the growth of those sort of races is gonna explode at some point in the U.S. because they're really a lot of fun to do, and it's completely different than doing a single stage race.
Yeah, I've done one in the US and it was very interesting because you have this one task to complete and then your next task is to take care of yourself. It was also self-supported. So it combines a lot of other factors, which I've always thought ultra runners always say they love the puzzle and the artistry of doing an ultra. And in a stage race, especially a self-supported one, that's even more important. But then again, people don't sign up. So it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, the stage race is about recovering after you finish the stage, right? Especially the self-supported one. It's also, sleeping with 8 other people in a tent together. So,
Yep.
the group dynamics, it brings in a lot of other factors, which to me is really exciting and engaging. But yeah, when you look at these stage races, a very small percentage of the participants are from the U.S. Although there is a race called the Trans Rockies, which is
Yep.
kind of, stage racing light, if you will, because it's really not self-supported. You get support at night, but that's a good intro to the challenges of stage racing.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And just with your travels and racing all over the world, how does trail running, or I guess the full ultra community in some places, kind of differ by region? And especially you spend a lot of time in Greece if you wanted to even focus on that area too.
Yeah, I think that culturally, a lot of European countries are still very unique unto themselves. Here in Greece, there are races that rival Western states as far as definitely as far as difficulty, but as far as beauty, as far as lore, as far as support and camaraderie along the route. But 90% of the participants are Greek, and then the other 5% are from countries nearby, Bulgaria, or Romania, or Croatia, and periodically you have someone from France or Spain, and they just love these races, but it's still just so very unique to the country you're in. A lot of these races, and the growth of trail running is paralleling what we're seeing in the U.S. I call it the road to trail conversion, where a lot of road runners are converting to trail runners. That's happening at an equal clip in the European, EU countries as it is in the U.S. So more and more people are discovering trail running, and they're just not traveling as much as, like, if you go to, like, I just ran the Athens Marathon last weekend. If you go to a big international marathon like that, there's people from all over the world coming. I think there's 140 countries represented. But if you go to an iconic trail race in Greece, like the Route, it's 90% Greek.
Yeah, totally. And then there's a number of other ones. What are the names of some of the other iconic races in Greece specifically?
There's a Zagordy mountain. There's the biggest gorge, the Vikos Gorge in Europe, I think, or at least in Eastern Europe, is called the Vikos Gorge, and there's a place called Zagordy Mountain, and there's a really famous race there, the Zagordy Trail. There's not a 100-miler. There's a 50-miler, 50K, and I think a half marathon. But almost every weekend in Greece somewhere, there's an iconic race on a trail or on the road.
Wow, it's so interesting because we're all so insulated with, maybe we see UTMB, but outside of that, it's like a hard rock, Western, maybe Eastern states kind of centric world we live in over here in the U.S.
Yeah, and even on the on the islands, on the Greek islands, there's really great trail running on the Greek islands. And I imagine in the next decade, more people are going to be discovering these races because when you run on a Greek island, it's unique unto itself. You have the Aegean Sea or the Ionian Sea. You have towering peaks. You have it all in the span of 50 or 100 kilometers.
Yeah, totally. I think it's just really, I mean, especially as you always point to, it's more a way of exploration and adventure versus competition. And then especially living and mostly moving to Greece really exemplifies that, which I think is really the through line in your life as well, of just living what you write about and taking it to that next level of where you even reside.
Hey, I think you and I are, cut from the same cloth. I mean, we're kindred spirits in that regard.
Totally. Yeah. So I am mostly interested, well, as most of us are, in what I don't know. So I want to go back to kind of your start in the beginning of ultra running. So in the early 90s or so, what was it like? How did you find out about races? Did you have to know people or meet people? And how did you sign up? What's different about it 30 plus years ago?
Oh, I remember signing up for a 50-mile race because I met these guys that blew past me on a run. I thought it was, like a super elite runner because I was running, 10 or maybe 12 kilometers out to the Golden Gate Bridge. I lived in San Francisco and I was always passing people. Like no one was ever passing me. And then one day these two guys passed me going up a hill as though I was standing still. I mean, it was like they were different species of human. And I got to the top of the hill, and thankfully they were up there. They were doing burpees at the top of the hill. But I finally got out of them. They were training for this 50-mile race, and I remember looking at them going, "Hold it, the marathon is the longest race on earth. Like that's more than a marathon." And they kind of looked at me like, "You idiot." And then I said, where are the campgrounds or where are the hotels along the way? And they said, no, buddy, the gun goes off and you run and you stop when you cross the finish line. And one guy kind of elbowed to the other guy and said, if you cross the finish line. And they looked at me like, there's no way this joker would ever cross the finish line. So I went to the public library, and you're too young to remember there was something called the Dewey Decimal System where you could look up things like on microfilm. And I found this race. It was outside of Sacramento, and I signed up. I remember mailing in my application with a physical check, and I went and did this 50-miler, and it was the toughest thing I'd ever done. I mean, there were points where I thought I was going to just disintegrate and die. It was so brutal, and I was in the finisher's tent. I made it somehow, and I was in the finisher's tent, wrapped in this miler's base blanket, and those same two guys walk by and they're high-fiving each other saying, we qualified. And I'm thinking, for what, the insane asylum? I mean, what did you qualify for? And they said, no, we qualified for the Western States 100. And I looked at them and said, hold it, 100 like miles? And they said, yes, miles. And I said, twice as far as we just ran? They said, yes. And I said, but you have to run all night to do that. And they're like, yeah, you do. I said, where do you sleep? And they said, you don't sleep. Put on a headlamp. You cross a river in the middle of the night. You just keep moving forward. And I thought it was the most insane thing I'd ever heard of. And the last thing they said before they left is, hey, buddy, you qualified as well. And I remember when they said that to me, I knew that for the rest of my life, if I didn't try this race, I would never live down those words. I would always wonder, could I have done this race? Could I have pulled it off? So I signed up for the Western States, and that was 1994. And that was my first 100-miler.
Wow. And so you go from this 50-miler that you showed up for and really just brute strength to the end. And then between that and Western States, how do you gather information, learn about all the aspects, maybe nutrition and stuff? How do you meet other people in this community doing it back then? Because this is just a bit before the internet,
Yeah. No, I mean, I look back on it and I wonder how I didn't die. First of all, because I had no idea what the hell I was getting myself. I was running and I was a surfer. I remember I was running in board shorts. Like I didn't even own running gear. And the longest training run I did, I think, was 30 miles. And I thought, I can't run much further than that. So, save your legs. But there was really no training. I mean, there was nothing that I didn't have a coach. I didn't talk to anyone or anything. I just showed up at the start of this race. And, when you're 30 years old, you can pull shit off. You can't when you're older. So I relied on just, kind of my brute strength to get me to the finish line. But I mean, I remember running with a headlamp that went out, and I had like a pen light. Those lights, like on the keychain for your, that kind of you push a button. I was running with that through terrain that I now know is so intense. Bushwhacking in the middle of the night, not even knowing if I was on the right trail. Yeah, I don't know how I made it, but somehow I did.
Yeah, no kidding. What did you eat during that 50 miler? What was your nutrition plan?
Oh, I was eating candy bars. I remember it was like Mars bars and Snickers bars. And then I remember I got so nauseous I couldn't eat. And they had like chicken noodle soup at one of the aid stations. And I thought I'm going to throw up if I have that. And the volunteer just insisted I had this chicken noodle soup, and it just brought me back to life. So from that point forward, every aid station, I was getting chicken noodle soup.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that, it was really hard, surprised you finished, but that had to feed that adventure or that desire that kind of was born out of that famous birthday run, that this was something new. It was so hard. You weren't sure if you could make it, but you made it to the end. When it seemingly continued to happen throughout your life, does that fuel wanting to go for that next big thing?
Yeah, well, the spirit of adventure. I mean, it gets in you, and it owns you. And it wasn't just the race. I mean, it was being out in the wilderness all night. I mean, let's face it. How many humans are outside for the full cycle of a single day in modern times? Very few. But when you run an ultramarathon, you're out in the elements for 24 hours. And that's where we came from. As a species, this is kind of something primordial in us, longs for that. And it just infected me. I thought, I love this shit. And so I thought, I made 100 miles. I wonder if I could go further. And I learned about the Badwater Ultramarathon, which at that time, it was kind of 146 miles. Right now it's 135 because you stop before climbing all the way to the summit of Mount Whitney. But back in 1995, I mean, pretty much everyone finished the race at the Whitney Portals, which is 135 miles, and then went up to the top of Mount Whitney, which is 146 miles in total. So I thought, let's see if you can do that.
Would your time stop at Whitney Portal, but then you'd all continue to climb up to the peak?
Yeah, that's how it worked. Yeah, and then you sign the logbook at the summit, and you just put in it was kind of like an honor system. You just put in the time that you got there. But the official race stopped at the portals at 135.
Oh, that's awesome. And then you get to descend back down those 99 switchbacks and then call it a day.
You brought up something, an oversight on my behalf is exactly what you just said. I thought, okay, you finished 135, get your gear on, get up to the summit. I got up to the summit, I signed the logbook. I'm like, right on, I did it. And then I thought, holy shit, you got to go back down now. Oh, and the going back down part was torture. I mean, I was walking backwards down those switchbacks.
My gosh. Yeah, and throughout this journey and this progression, when do you start latching on to the aspect of you're both good at it and you enjoy the storytelling or bringing people along? Had you started thinking about that aspect, or was this all just for Dean at this time?
Yeah, no, it was just more through me. I mean, I never had ever taken competition seriously. I literally never. I mean, there was one race where I said, okay, I really want to do my best in this race. And it was the Badwater Ultramarathon in 2004. And so I really trained hard and I won the race. But it was kind of just a race to me. Like, I've done Badwater 10 times. That was maybe the least fulfilling of all 10. It was just, it was just like a job, just showing up at the job, executing and getting the job done. So I've never looked at myself as a competitive athlete really. And I've never strove to be on the podium. I've always looked at it as, the spirit of adventure and, and the stories that unwind during these adventures. And, when I wrote my first book, I thought, if 10 of my buddies buy this book, I'll be lucky. And I was really surprised that it became, like an instant New York Times bestseller, and people were interested in the storytelling about doing these ultra marathons because it was such an obscure sport. But people that did run ultra marathons, even people that didn't run, were reading this book, going, "Oh, this is a whole universe I never knew existed."
Yeah, totally. I mean, I read Ultramarathon Man and was inspired like probably millions others, but once the book takes off and kind of your name becomes known, how does that change things, and does it make it harder to find that enjoyment within the races now that you show up and people know who you are?
Yeah, I mean, it took some. You bring up a really good point. It took some growth, some personal growth on my behalf to learn how to adjust to people recognizing me, because I'm very much an introvert, and I need my private alone time. And all of a sudden, I was at races, and I'd come into an aid station, and nowadays people want to take selfies. They bring copies of my book, they want me to sign it. So this whole public persona is still nothing I'm very comfortable with, but it's something I've learned kind of how to navigate. And sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes I enjoy it. Some notoriety is enjoyable, but other times, especially when you're having a really bad race, let's face it, if you got an upset stomach, there's snot coming out of your nose, you're just a mess, and you pull into an aid station, there are people that want to take selfies with you. It's not, it's not so glamorous, but I've learned how to deal with it, and it really hasn't taken the joy out of running for me, because I still can disappear and go out on my own on a trail and find my peace.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think at the start of A Runner's High, your most recent book, you talk about like having a fall and, the volunteer giving you a bit of a hard time or something too. So I'm sure in your mind, even if they don't know who you are, they know who you are, there is that bit of a fear of like, maintain who I am at all times and not get caught with my pants down per se.
Yeah, I mean, there's an element of that, but and people, it's funny because I don't want to tell you how old I am, but I'm fucking old, and people still race me. Young guys, which I think is hilarious. They want to beat me and say, "Oh, I beat Dean Karnazes," and it's at first I was kind of off-putting to me, like, come on, I'm not the athlete I was. But now now I think people will see that I'm just a guy that keeps going year after year, and they appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it is that double-edged sword of like, it's so amazing and must be fulfilling to inspire so many people, but it also does come with that opposite side of, not everyone is going to want to be inspired. Some are going to want to take that and use it to beat you, even when it's like, I'm in my 60s, man, you're 20 years old. What's the point of racing me?
I know. It's like a Thanksgiving fun run, 5K, and they're racing with me. I'm like, Jesus, okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Do you have other races or things that you haven't done that you want to do? Specifically, I'm kind of wondering and looking at like the 200 scene that's blown up. It seems like that's almost right up your alley.
Yeah, it's funny. I did my first 200 miler in 1996, and it was a 12-person relay race. And I just signed up as a team of one, because there was no such thing as a 200 miler back then. And nowadays, the 200 miler is a new marathon almost. I mean, they're everywhere. And I've run, I don't know, I've probably run a dozen or more 200 milers. But I'm preparing actually in not even a couple weeks, next week, to run. It's a 300 miler, and it's actually a little bit further than 300 miles. It's there's a famous race here in Greece called the Spartathlon. I don't know if you know that one, and if your listeners don't know it, it's basically retraces the steps of the original marathoner Philippidis, the guy who ran from the battlefield of Marathon to the Acropolis and announced the Greek victory over the Persians, and then he died. But before he did that, he ran from Athens to Sparta to recruit the Spartans to come help the Athenians. And that race is called the Spartathlon. It's 153 miles. But if you read the history books, after he got to Sparta, the backstory is that the Spartans said they'd come help fight the Persians, but they couldn't leave for battle for 6 days because their religion didn't allow them to leave for battle until the moon was full. So Phidippides, thought, oh, this is great. They're coming to help us, but they're delayed by 6 days. I got to go back and tell my Athenian brethren that the Spartans are delayed. So he ran back to Athens the next day. So they now have a race called the Phidippidion, which is basically that from Athens to Sparta and back, it's like 498 kilometers, I think, the full route. So I'm doing that. It starts next Thursday.
Wow. So this is a good avenue to go down then. So when you're on the verge of doing a huge race like this, is there something specific you do, maybe mindset wise, or to prepare yourself to kind of be in that moment of running for so long? Is there any way that you mentally prepare for such an endeavor?
I have the same, I've been, in the last 6 months, I can't tell you how many long races I've done. And I've said, okay, that's it. I'm done for this. This season, I'm done. I'm not doing another race. But it seems like every weekend I'm doing some insane race. But I just show up with the same commitment, and that is I'm going to try my best at this race. I'm going to give it everything I've got. I'm not going to quit unless I fall, unless they take me out of here in an ambulance. And that's my commitment. Whether I can pull it off or not, it will be determined, but I'm not going to stop without giving it my best effort. And I just have that commitment to myself every race I go into. And yeah, even I'll tell you, I ran I would say just the Athens Marathon on this past Sunday, but I ran the Athens Marathon this past Sunday, and it really hurt. I run a 142 kilometer race the week prior called the Immortals race, and I actually fell pretty hard on the pavement and bruised my knee, and it really flared up during the Athens Marathon, and it took me 5 hours to run a marathon. I ran the first half in, I think an hour 50. And then the next half, it took me, over 3 hours. And I was walking at points, and not even walking at points, just standing still at points. And I thought, what are you made of? Are you going to get to the finish of this marathon? People have passed me going, what's wrong? Carl, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm in the hurt locker. But I kept going and got to the finish. And it was the slowest. I've never run a marathon in over 5 hours before. I never thought I would. And I ran it. It was over 5 hours. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I don't know why that particular race has such deep meaning to me, but I really never thought I would see the finish line. And somehow I just kept, trying my best and got there.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful. And I was pacing an elite athlete in a race, and he was just barely ahead of cutoffs. He was sick and stuff, but it was so inspiring to be at that point too, to see all the people that, are trying to finish their first 100-miler, and he's amongst them, and they're just so happy he's back there. It almost humanized him, and it inspired them. It's very interesting how what could be deemed as a poor performance can also be so inspiring and uplifting to both yourself and others around, because it shows you that when life gets you down, if you just keep on moving forward, you can eventually hit that finish line too.
Yeah, I don't know who your runner was, but I admire the man or woman who it was, because I really think that elite runners that just, eat crow when something goes horribly wrong and just stick it out and gut it out and make it to the finish line. I think that's the definition of a champion to me. They're a hero versus an elite who says, I'm not having a good race. I'm not going to end up on the podium, and just drops out and tries to save their legs for the next race. I see the logic in both, but I really think the former is a real hero, and they give so much. It gives so much more back to the community. sure, ending up on the podium is inspiring to people, but not as many people as someone who could be on the podium who had a bad race and just, hung tough and got to the finish line.
Well, and I think so many good stories and inspiration and people that the community gravitates to, it's born out of familiarity or relatability. And I think that's why your story is so inspiring and powerful too, is everyone could see themselves at a bar drinking. And then where your story changes is he ran off into the night basically, but it's born in that place where we can all put ourselves versus like an elite who's ran growing up and was always thought to be an amazing runner. It's a lot harder to relate to that person because we don't have that common point in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone can have a VO2 max like Killian's, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't relate to what that guy can do. It's not approachable by most people, but just the average Joe that quits smoking or stops drinking, and starts running. That's a story that people can relate to.
Totally. Yeah. And how did you decide to write your first book or tell your story? What pushed you to put it out there more than just continuing to race and go after all these things?
I like stories. I mean, we talked about me being Greek. I remember as a kid I read Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey with Achilles and Odysseus and the Cyclops and Siren sisters, and I love the construction of that story. I mean, that's still one of the greatest pieces of literature ever composed. And I thought, this is a challenge. Like whoever wrote this, Homer, there's a lot of debate whether it was multiple authors, but they really had some tools and some devices they used to make the story so powerful. And it became a challenge to me, just like running an ultramarathon. Like can you write a good book? And I didn't. A lot of athletes have ghostwriters, and I thought I'd rather write my own book, even if it's bad. I'd rather have someone read a bad book that's by me versus having someone who's a professional writer do it. So I thought see if you can write this book, and yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind because I wrote the book. And then I said to a friend whose cousin was an author, does she have an agent? And she said, yes, we'll put you in touch. And I talked to this agent. The agent said, oh, it's impossible for a first-time author to ever get a book published. I'll tell you that right now. So I'm not looking for first-time authors. But she said, send me the material. I'll take a look at it. And she called me the next day and said, this is kind of interesting. Let's do a proposal and we'll send it to some publishers. I didn't even know what that meant, but we did a book proposal. And the next day, like a big publishing house, Penguin Random House, called me and said, hey, we want to buy options to your book. And I'm like, what is an option? Like, what does this mean? I had no idea. Yeah, the next thing I know, I was publishing this book.
Yeah. And then how does life change? Do you get exposed to an even broader audience? Do you make a book tour? Like what goes after this?
Yeah, things have changed in the book publishing world. But when when Ultramarathon Man came out, I went on a 12-city tour, and people say there was a saying back then that the book tour is the punishment for writing the book. I mean, it was grueling, and you can't imagine. They put you up in all these nice hotels in these nice cities. Chicago, Dallas, New York. But you basically arrive at, midnight, you come into this great room, it's all you can do to crawl into bed, go to sleep. And then the next day you start, with they call them drive time radio, like the morning radio shows. And so you start at 5 a.m. and you basically do the radio shows, then you do the talk shows, and then you go to a book appearance, and then you get on another plane, you fly to the next city. So I went on this book tour, and it was grueling, but I enjoyed it. I met so many great people, and people say I'm an inspiration, but the stories I was hearing from people were inspiring me. Is the truth of it, and I can't imagine being like a real legitimate star. I'm kind of an underground person, and the people that recognize me in an airport are great people. I mean, they're athletes like us. They're people I want to sit down and have a beer with. They're decent people. They're respectful. we can relate to each other. I can't imagine being like a rock star, and having, fawning fans chasing you all around. But it's been a real blessing for me, my notoriety, and I've met some really, really terrific people.
Yeah. Did that first book and the success put pressure to find more challenges even outside of the ultra space too? Like, I don't know, you've done so many different ones, but just like running across the country, things like this, did you feel an added pressure to live up to the story and the name you'd already built?
No, not so much. I just felt the curiosity for like the next great adventure. And you talked about me running 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. The North Face approached me after the finish of Western States one year, and they said, "Hey, we want to get into the trail running scene," because the North Face was, a climbing company. And this is a couple decades ago. And they said, would you come on board as like a consultant and help us design some clothing and footwear? Tough job, right? So I was like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
So I signed up as a North Face athlete, and every year they had this expedition proposal where, people, mostly mountain climbers, would submit an expedition proposal, climbing K2, climbing the North Face of Everest, whatever. They're always on mountains somewhere. And I thought, an expedition can be urban. It doesn't have to be on a mountainside. And so I submitted this proposal for running 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. And the VP of marketing thought it was brilliant. He's like, let's do this. Well, the North Face didn't even make road running gear, which was so ironic, but it was an expedition. So we approached it not like a race, but more of an expedition. And that's how, my next book came about, because I wrote about running 50 marathons in 50 states in 50 days. So it's always just me thinking, what's really cool? Like, what would I love to do? And then trying to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the stories of the 50 marathons, 50 states in 50 days. And it sounded like a whirlwind of logistics. And on that note, was there a time throughout all of this that you bit off more than you could chew?
Always. Always.
Yeah. Do you have a good story of like maybe it was like that was a little much?
Yeah. I mean, I've got so many stories. I mean, there's one time I ran the Badwater Ultramarathon, and then I had an invitation to run with the Tarahumara Indians in the Copper Canyon, of Mexico, to run this 100K the next weekend. And I'll never forget. And, it's not easy to get to the Copper Canyon, first of all. I mean, there's a couple flights involved, plus a long drive. And I got there, and I was just completely destroyed. The race was the next day. And I remember the start. It was kind of cool and misty. And like the Grand Canyon, if you've ever been there, it can be, at the summit, it can be kind of cool. But when you get down into the valley, the temperature rises. I mean, 3 degrees for every 1,000 feet. It got so hot during this race. It's the middle of summer in mainland Mexico, duh. And I'm running, I think I had tights on and like a sweatshirt, just dying. And I come into these aid stations with these military guys, and all they had were these, I don't know how else to say it, but it looked like a condom filled with water. It's like a plastic bag filled with water. And they're military rations, and you're supposed to kind of bite into the side of it a little bit and squeeze it into your mouth. But it's like biting a water balloon. I would just bite this thing and it explode. And I had no water in my mouth. And I don't know how I finished that race, but somehow I finished the 100K the next weekend after Badwater in Mexico. And yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about these stories.
When it is like a point like that of nothing's going right, I feel awful, is your mindset just becoming just get to the finish or just keep moving forward? Like there's no thought of quitting or anything like that?
There was no option of quitting on that one. I mean,
fair.
I mean,
Yeah.
No, I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere, and there's who's going to find you out there? I mean, you're on a single track trail. There's no horses. I mean, if something happened, you'd have to get carried out of there somehow. There's no helicopter that's going to come in and rush you out of there. So I was like pumping adrenaline the whole time just for, self-preservation on that one. I kept going in and out of like half being asleep, half awake, saying to myself, focus. I mean, there's a cliff right there. don't take another step to your left. You're gonna die. So with that one, it was like the whole time I was trying to stay present, not thinking about anything except taking my next footsteps safely.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I want to just, as wrap up, broaden out a little bit and kind of hear what your thoughts on how the trail space is changing, and then also where you think it's going, because I think it's easy to say that there's more people doing it and stuff, but I think on the other side it's also getting more commercialized, and it's harder to find some of those more mom and pop races. I guess where do you kind of see it now, and where do you think it's going?
That's a really good question, and you're right. I mean, the popularity of ultra running and trail running has grown tremendously. And I mean, I was at Leadville this year, Leadville Trail 100, and you can't believe at the aid stations the amount of gear and people there. I mean, people are spending tens of thousands of dollars on custom tents and everything to support their runners. So it's become a big business.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen that. We've all seen that. I think it's a double-edged sword, as you said. I mean, one thing I've always tried to do is to make ultra running a little bit more legitimate, so that, young runners that want to make a career of ultra running can actually do it. For me to actually, I've actually been a professional runner for over 30 years, but it hasn't been through, it's been through my own like entrepreneurial pursuits versus running itself. But I thought, if the business is in a place where young, promising runners can actually dedicate themselves just to what they love, that'd be nice. But I think all the people coming into the sport are eventually going to look for other races outside of the U.S. or within the U.S. So I still think these smaller races are going to continue to sprout up. It's hard to market because there's so much noise out there with races, but I think a lot of them that put on a good experience. At the end of the day, it's about an experience, right? A race experience. So if you can put on a good experience for the participants, the word of mouth is going to spread. So I think the sport is going to continue to grow. You and I are so immersed in this sport. We think that everyone knows about ultra running and about trail running. They don't. Believe me, there's still so many people I talk to that have no idea. If I say, well, yeah, I ran a 100-mile race, they have no idea what that even, like, they don't know it's possible for a human to even do that. So there's still a lot of room for growth. And, ultimately, I think the more people that are on trails running, the better it is for everyone. Because, when you're on the trail running, you're more appreciative of the environment. You really focus on the air you breathe. Like, clean air is so important. So you're more environmentally conscious. And I think that's a good thing. So ultimately, there's people say, how are you going to manage the growth? You can't manage the growth. I think it's self-policing. It's, people like you and me on podcasts and elsewhere saying, hey, be responsible, leave it better than you found it, pack everything out. And from what I've seen, the trail running community is pretty good stewards. I'm really proud of what I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I'm totally in agreement. And I think it is going to get segmented into, there will be capitalizing at places like Leadville, but then these mom and pop places where people are out there for that adventure and to test themselves, there's going to be so much room for that too, and more regional aspect and community driven, and people can experiment before going to Western for their first 100. They'll know if they like running 100 before committing to 10 years of a lottery. So I think you're spot on there. And my last question for you is, what advice or what would you tell people today wanting to create a career or a life in the running space, whether it's on the athlete side or more peripheral of maybe storytelling or something? Is what have you learned in creating a life driven by running that you would pass along to someone else wanting to do the same?
Yeah, I mean, now, I mean, when I became an ultramarathoner, when I quit my corporate job, it was less common. Nowadays, with the gig economy and people working remote, especially with COVID, digital nomadism, it's prevalent. So you can have a legitimate job and still, go running every day. You can live in Boulder, Colorado, even though the firm might be based in, India or something. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But I would say that, if you're going to be a trail runner, unless you're of the caliber of a Walmsley or Courtney or someone on that level, and even they, you have to promote yourself. There's a lot of self-promotion involved, and you have to feel comfortable with that. You have to be comfortable promoting yourself, but doing it in an authentic sort of way. So, affiliating with sponsors where you actually use their products, you like their products, and you feel good endorsing their products. So try to be as authentic as you can, and and try your best, obviously, to be as competitive as you can. Remain humble, remain visible, and talk to others. Listen more than you talk, and have a go at it. You don't want to be 50 and say, God, I wish I would have pursued my running career a little bit further when I was a young man.
Totally.
That's my best advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard a line you said on another podcast at one point where I think it might have been about that first 50-mile race. And it was like, well, I'm always going to regret it if I don't try to do it. So I might as well try it. And I think that's like boiled down into how people should just live their life. If there's that question of trying it, why not try it? Worst thing that happens is you wasted a day and feel pretty bad. And now you don't have to do another 50-miler.
Yeah, no, I think the biggest regrets in life are the things you didn't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Dean. This was awesome. And it's always good to talk to you and hear your stories from 30 years of doing everything that gets you inspired. And some of it turns out good and some of it's even a better story.
You're welcome. I wish we could do this podcast next time.
Thanks for listening. That was a fun episode. And I think Dean is especially interesting character because he was around at the times of Scott Jurek and Carl Meltzer and the height of Jeff Rose and stuff. But Dean was so good at building a brand that extended beyond just ultra running and trail running. Dean brought other people into like running from California to New York. It made this story that people could follow and think was really cool. He was just really good at marketing himself and showing and bringing other people into the sport. And I think it really showed the storytelling aspect and putting yourself out there and how important that is in a sport like this, where I think even today, a lot of the top runners, you would say, are fairly bland. They don't share a lot. We don't know about them. Maybe they're mysterious, but mysterious only gets you so far. So I think sharing more, having some spicier takes, putting yourself out there, going after things that are a little bit crazier, as he kind of talks about in the episode, that's where runners can build brands and have income and stuff. I mean, even myself, a lot of my records keep going down lately and had some issues staying healthy the last year or so, but just having these different aspects and putting things out like a book and relating to people and wanting to start a podcast. I think that's where the magic is, when you're a person to people and you show what you're passionate about. I think for maybe a decade, people thought I was a big idiot. Maybe I am, but just by wearing tiger clothing, I think that's the generalization I got. And by starting a podcast, I wanted to put some of my views and thoughts and things out there and get guests that I wanted. And so 50 episodes in, we are going after huge guests, trying to put good info out there. We got a couple more great episodes lined up. So yeah, if you want to support this and help me keep this thing going as we get bigger and bigger and be a part of a community, let's make that community over on Patreon. So patreon.com/freeoutside. And until Monday, stay elite, my friends.